There was a time when I swore I would never make homemade ketchup again. The primary reason for that is when I made it and I tasted it, I felt like it was just like a cheap ketchup from the store. And I thought I would rather buy a cheap ketchup from the store than spend hours working on it and have it taste bad. It wasn't until a few years later that I decided to start playing with the recipe and see what I could do to make it taste good. So this is the result. I've already prepared my 13 pounds of tomatoes. I'm just cutting my tomatoes in quarters just to help them cook down a little more. If I have a tiny one, I might not cut it at all. If I have a smaller one, I'll just cut it in half. And that just makes it so that it cooks down better. Because I'm putting these in the food mill, it's not super important. Now, if I had froze these, I wouldn't even need to cut them. So sometimes I'll do that when I'm making a sauce like this. Since I'm doing so many different colors of tomatoes, my ketchup will be a little less red. I've also prepared my 1 onion. Because this is for a sauce, I like to cut the onion a little more finely. And my half of a red pepper. Just like the onion, I try to dice the red pepper up finely. It just works better for a sauce. Now I'll place my tomatoes on the stove and get them simmering for about 20 minutes. The key is that I want them to be super soft and ready for the food mill. While the tomatoes are softening, I'm gonna cook up my other vegetables. So here's 1 onion, half of a red pepper, 2 tablespoons of water, that just keeps it from scorching, and 1 tablespoon of garlic. This is a minced garlic. Mine's pre-minced, which makes it very nice as far as preparation, especially when you're doing things in bulk the way that I tend to. But this would work really well also for fresh garlic. Then I'll place it on the burner and simmer it for 5 minutes. Now these onions are nice and soft, so I'll set them aside and wait for the tomatoes. I then load up the hopper of my food mill and I'll start sending these through. It really does make it an easy process. I mean, you put your tomatoes in the top, your pulp comes out, and then it gets caught in the honey strainer. The juice goes in the bottom. All of the seeds and skin go off to the side here. At a certain point, my honey strainer can't handle anymore, so I have to encourage some of the juice to go through, and usually using a spatula works well for that. Sometimes I decide that I would just rather cook it down for a little bit longer, and I go ahead and transfer this very wet pulp over. I don't want it too dry because if it is, then it won't have the time for all of those spices to cook into it. So I'll put this in my pan at this point. So if you look at the skins and seeds, there's actually a fair amount of pulp still in here. So I'll put that back through one more time. I then add my onion mixture into a blender. I really like the Vitamix. That's not a paid promotion. I just actually like the Vitamix. I've tried a lot of different ones, and I mean, this one, I do so much with so much bulk, and it can handle it. Some of my other ones I've had trouble with overheating or just not cutting it down fine enough. And I have had no issues with this one. I'll let you know if that ever changes. I'll then add the tomato pulp on top of that. Essentially what I want to have happen is I want it's gonna splash all over me. I'll go away from me. Essentially what I want to happen is I want everything ground down to very fine bits. So this is gonna take 2 different batches, which is fine. Then I'll take it and run it through on the blender. Since I want it so smooth, I'll continue to increase the speed. I don't wanna hold it at the high speed for too long because I don't want it to be really frothy, which it already is, but that'll cook out. I'll then add that to my large pot and I'll do 1 more batch. I really recommend cleaning out your blender right away. It comes clean so much easier. Now I'll add 1½ cups of white vinegar, ½ a cup of sugar, 1 tablespoon of salt, 1 tablespoon of paprika, 1½ teaspoons of celery salt, 1 teaspoon of cinnamon, 1 teaspoon of dry mustard, and 1/2 teaspoon of allspice. I'll then stir it together and put it on the stove to simmer. I've got my ketchup nice and thick. My family, I've found, doesn't like it when it's thin at all, probably because they'll use it for, you know, like hot dogs or hamburgers, and if it's too thin, then it'll make the bread soggy, so I don't want that. So I'm gonna fill my wide mouth pint-sized jars. You don't need wide mouth, but I prefer it because it's easier to get a knife into. And then I'll fill it up to 1/2 inch of headspace, which is the space from the top of the food to the top of the jar. Okay, so that one I got a tiny bit too much in. Really easy to fix it. I keep a little gravy ladle nearby, and then I can just pull it out really quick if I need to. I actually really love this ketchup. It's kind of funny, you know, it does taste different than like a Heinz or that kind of a thing. And at first I thought I might miss it, but it's actually gotten to the point where I far prefer to have mine. I think part of it is just knowing that I know exactly what's in my ketchup. I don't know, it's kind of nice to have less of the preservatives and the chemicals and just more wholesome goodness. It's one of the reasons that I like to make my own stuff at home. And it's a lovely thing to do with all those tomatoes from my garden. I found it's a great thing to use a spatula as you get to the end. There's actually more that sticks to the sides than you would think. I'll use a damp cloth to clean off the rim, and that just makes it so that there's no interference with the seal. And then I'll place my lids on and place my rings fingertip tight. And everything is excessively hot, so speed is of the essence. Now those are ready to go into the boiling water bath. They'll go for 15 minutes if at sea level. I'm at 1,200 feet, so they're gonna go for 20. I then remove them from the canner and place them about 1 to 2 inches apart so that they can cool down quickly. I'll leave them resting for 24 hours until they have a nice seal. I'll then remove the rings and use hot soapy water to wash the jars, paying special attention to where the threads are. Then I'll put them in a cool, dry location and use them in the next 1 to 3 years. It seems a little weird to eat ketchup plain, but sometimes the best way to get all of the flavors is just to go for it straight. I really recommend taste testing your stuff because then that lets you know what you want to differ with the next time. Everybody's family's palate's a little bit different. I actually really love this ketchup. So it just does not taste like the store-bought ketchup. It's a little sweet, but has just a little bit of tart right at the back of your mouth. And, oh, I don't know, how would I describe it? You can taste the different spices that are in there as they go along your tongue. You know, it's interesting, you have the different taste receptors in your mouth. And you kind of get that as you swallow it. Anyway, really good.